Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant. Today I'm joined by Kirsty Baggs-Morgan. Kirsty, welcome. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Anthony. Good to be here.
So tell us a little bit about, I know that you've started this group for HR people that seems to be taking off. So I thought it's a good chance to get you on and explain a bit about that for our audience. But maybe just give us a bit of the background that led up to this.
Sure. I mean, my own HR career was 25 years, and I often felt, particularly when I did standalone roles, that if there was something that landed on my desk that I hadn't dealt with before, I didn't know where to start in terms of finding people I needed to support me with it. I was very, very bad at networking, so I didn't really have any peers or any
Right.
sense of community. So what I decided to do was create, I mean, you can call it like a Yellow Pages, but a more modern version. I decided to create a directory of the sorts of people and businesses that HR professionals need. And it's not just what HR professionals need to do their jobs better, it's also what they need for themselves as people working in HR. So we have coaches, we have HR recruiters, we've got people who do employee engagement, we have mediators, people that do grievance investigations, public speakers, all sorts of things. And we launched it as an app in June this year. So it's now much more easy to navigate because you can search for what you're looking for, which you couldn't do in the original hard copy version. So yeah, it's taken off very quickly. We've got about 1,500 subscribers already. And in terms of the businesses advertising is not quite the right word. In terms of the businesses in the directory, we've got about 130 now.
Oh, wow.
Mostly small to medium businesses, but basically anybody who wants to get in front of an audience of HR professionals, it's worth them being in there because that's who the app is for. Yeah.
So I just want to pick up on something you asked or that you mentioned there about the feeling of isolation, not quite feeling like you knew how to network. So there might be a bit of a myth there, I think, to dispel, because aren't all HR people extroverts and people, that sort of extroverted love that kind of thing? Or is that not the case?
Oh, I think like with any profession, there's a real mix. And there's an interesting dynamic in HR because so much of what we deal with is confidential. So if you're in a large organization, you're part of an HR team, you have peers and colleagues that you can chat to about the things that are going on in the organization. If you are standalone, you have literally nobody that you can talk to.
Right.
And that's pretty tough. So I think there's a real mixture of introverts and extroverts. I wouldn't say, honestly, it's probably about 50-50. Just because we're good at managing people issues doesn't mean we want to be around huge groups of people all the time or be the center of attention or those sorts of things. I used to find that sort of thing really terrifying, particularly in my early career. So there's a mixture, but a lot of people come to me with confidence issues or not feeling like they belong at the board table or the exec table because they're in HR and they're seen differently. So there's a lack of confidence there, I think.
Interesting. Okay. So that might align a little bit to the, the thing we hear about a lot, like the imposter syndrome type stuff. But what in your opinion, what's driving that lack of confidence, that lack of sort of feeling that, yeah, I've got the right to be at the table and add value at the strategic?
There's a couple of things, I think. The biggest one I see is there are so many misconceptions around what HR is and what HR should be doing and what we're there for, that it's very easy to feel like an imposter syndrome at a board table if people think that you're the Christmas party organizer. And I say that flippantly. I always use Christmas parties as my example, but I meet with a lot of CEOs and founders because one of the aspects of my work is I do due diligence exercises on behalf of private equity companies. So I meet a lot of business owners, and when they talk about making their first HR hire, They also need to put policies in place, make sure people are happy, and organize events. And there is a whole other world of people support at a strategic level that doesn't involve those things. And so I think the misconception or the different perceptions is one huge thing.
Right.
I mean, the number of times I stepped into a meeting with senior people and somebody would go, why is she here? And that wasn't a reflection on me as an individual. It was like, why is the HR person here? And I can remember thinking, but we're literally going to talk about the restructuring of the organization, which is going to involve people making decisions about people and then carrying those out. So, it's that sort of thing. So misconception, different perceptions is one. The second one is the fact that because a lot of HR roles start off very operationally and with all of that policy stuff, it's really quite hard to know, okay, what do I need to do differently? Now I've been promoted, and it doesn't mean I do more of the operational stuff. Now they want me to be strategic. And I don't really know what that means, because I've been doing grievances and hiring people and all of that good stuff for the last 15 years. And that was exactly the position I found myself in. One day, it didn't happen overnight, but at the point that I first got promoted to a global head of HR role, within a week, the CEO said to me, I thought you were more strategic than this. And I can remember thinking, why would you think that? Because I've been doing operational work my whole career, so why would you think that? So I think because there's that real difference between operational and strategic work, we do sometimes feel concerned and confused and unsure about, whether we should speak up, are we on the right track, that sort of thing. So those are the two things I think that make that tough.
So there's a big leap. There's, but like, if I'm hearing you correctly, between the operational day-to-day stuff and then the setting, the strategy type stuff, more long-range planning and all that, and prioritizing organizational goals, business goals. So there's, because it's interesting, I talk to C-level people across the spectrum, right? COOs, CPOs, now CFOs and others, chief marketing officers. And you hear a variation of this same thing, which is, well, when I move to functional leadership, there's an expectation of having the answers and, knowing what to do. But it's really hard in terms of how do you get that mentoring that prepares you for that step in advance? Is that something that people should be seeking externally? Is it an internal thing? Like, what are your views around that?
This is one of my soapbox topics.
I hoped it might be.
Some of this depends on the size of your organization. So I have come across HR individuals who had phenomenal mentors in-house when they work for large organizations. So there's a lady that I can think of that I'm quite friendly with, and she had the benefit of having an outstanding HR leader when she was developing in her career who prepared her for all of that. And so by the time she was ready to step into that role, she had that support. I had nothing. Nothing. So at the point that I was, I've done 3 standalone roles in my HR career. My first chief people officer role was in a very small company where I had a team of 3, but I was expected to be fully strategic. If you can't get that support from an HR expert internally, look outside. And there wasn't anything outside even 10 years ago. So I stopped working in HR properly in 2019.
Okay. So not that long ago.
Not that long ago. I mean, you were still doing a part-time head of HR role until May last year. So I only went fully self-employed just over a year ago. But I never had anybody that could guide me. I was always the most experienced HR person in my organization for honestly the last 15 years of my career in HR. I was the most senior person. There was nobody with more knowledge of HR than me, and nobody who had done a role more senior than mine that could guide me. So I reported to CEOs, and CEOs are brilliant at many things, but they've not spent 20 years working in HR. So they're expecting things from you, and if you don't have that mentoring and guidance from them, then you really do have to look outside. And so when I qualified as a coach, I don't coach anymore, but I did. My first thought was, I'm going to provide to developing HR professionals what was not there for me. And that's been my whole goal with everything I do. So I I currently now I run a strategy program for HR professionals, which I'm planning on expanding out further because it isn't just HR professionals that get stuck with strategy. But I put people through that, and that helps them bridge that gap. So it's about teaching people what is strategy, because that's a question I get asked a lot. People are like, I think I know what it is. Well, I did my CIPD 20 years ago, and I'm not entirely sure what it looks like in practice. And because I'm finding that there are so many organizations that aren't actually strategic, so many leadership teams that aren't actually strategic. Up until now, I've been helping HR professionals get better at that, but I'm also looking at helping others get better at that.
Yeah, that's interesting. The point you just made there, I want to pick up on that. So a lot of organizations, and this is kind of a funny thing, where if you're not really confident in yourself and your knowledge of how these things come together, if you have been doing really kind of more tactical type stuff, you don't have the courage potentially or the knowledge to ask and say, well, is this organization even strategic in its intent and actions in the first place? So you could say, I want someone to be more strategic, but if you're saying, excuse me, there's a component there that says, well, in order to do that, though, the business has to operate in that way. So if the business is operating really just on a tactical kind of day-to-day basis, then the issue doesn't lie with HR. The issue is with the CEO and the business itself, and knowing that, I think, is in itself something significant, because somebody can't say to you, hey, be strategic. And then you say, okay, yeah, sure. But you don't have a strategy, so what do you really want? When you say strategic, what do you mean? Like, as in, do you want goals for the organization that we, align everyone towards? If so, what are the goals? Like, people, HR can't be coming up with those in isolation. And then there's also the issue of, in order to be strategic, you need the information. And sometimes sharing that information may not be comfortable for everybody, right? So there's a whole mix,
there's so much. There's so much. And what's really interesting to me is the vast majority of my strategy program I've created from what I've learned doing due diligence and working with founders, CEOs, and leadership teams, and not from my HR career.
I'll bet.
It's honestly, I mean, I've probably, oh my goodness, if I think about so 80 people have been through my program. So that's 80 different organizations. There have probably so far been about 3 that had a whole business strategy. And I don't think I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
There are a number of people that come to me and say, our strategy is growth. And I'll just add, how? For how much? How far do you want to grow? Is it to infinity? Do you have an end goal? And then what do you want to grow by this year? So on part of your non title, I had somebody on my program not so long ago who worked for a huge NHS trust. Now, obviously, it's different when it's public sector. I get that. But this person said to me, we've got a really clear strategy. I said, awesome, let's hear it. This is unusual. I'm looking forward to this. And they showed it to me and they said, we're going to be the best in the world at X. And I said, lovely. How will you know when you are? And they said, well, I don't know. They haven't defined that. Okay. Makes it tough to achieve that goal, doesn't it, if you don't know what best looks like? And what is your goal for this year? Is it like, we want to be better than France, or we want to be better than you're like, how are you going to measure this? And the poor person went away and the fact that's not helping any of you. So regardless of the function that you're working in an organization, whether it is IT, whether it's marketing, finance, HR, whatever it is, you are there to help the organization move closer to its goals. That's what we're all there for. And that strategy is just how you're going to get from where you are today to where you want to be. But if you don't know where you want to be and you don't know where you are right now, you can't work out how to get there. It's like going into Google Maps and shouting, get me somewhere at your phone. Like, you need the blue dot and you need the red dot. So
you're so right. And this is perhaps what you're hitting on, that fundamental piece. It's not constrained, I don't believe, just to HR. And often we get lofty mission statements or,
54 pages is the most recent one I've seen, a 54-page slide deck.
Right. And, good on somebody for getting paid to do that. The question is, though, I think with a lot of this stuff and to me, you absolutely summarized it so beautifully, succinctly. We're all there in the organizations we work for. Even if you've started an organization like you and I, at the end of the day, we work to get closer to the goals. But if you don't know, specifically what those goals are, how do you measure any kind of progress? And then, that to me, then that's where the problems creep in. But I don't know. I don't know if this, by the way, what I'm going to say, I don't know whether Winston Churchill actually said this, but it seems to be a quote that's floating around attributed to him. But he was writing to somebody and he said, "I apologize for the length of this letter, but I didn't have time to write a short one." And that's something that writing complex stuff like a 54-page thing in a lot of ways, because it's just a massive brain fart, is actually, I think, sometimes easier than simplifying it down and saying, okay, well, what does this really mean? In a couple of pages, whether I'm going to present it or write it, whatever, there's arguments. I know Jeff Bezos likes people to write memos or whatever it is. So, however you want to communicate it, you have to think about it, And so I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is it's easy to come up with something like, oh, we're going to be the best health service in the world. Yes, the world. That sounds good. All right. How? Because the how is important, because that's what we're going to do from now until whenever it is that we reach that objective. And everybody seems, and maybe it was I know 10, 15 years ago when I was starting LS, and he's even huger now. Huger, I don't know if that's a word, a superlative, but anyway, let's say it is. Simon Sinek, right? And it's all about the kind of start with why and do all this kind of stuff. And it's that's great. That's amazing. You're galvanizing people emotionally, but the how is really important. And so to me, there's that piece that's lost. And then where I see the executive kind of comes in is anybody confident enough in themselves to say, to your CEO, or whoever it is, the team that's putting, this is all great, but how are we going to do it? And more than likely, we got the people on the front line here that we're going to say, well, this is what you need to do every day. So what's the 1, 2, 3 things that they've got to keep in mind? And then, so what ends up happening, and I think this is a problem across business, regardless of the size, is they don't know how to prioritize things. So they end up with,
usually.
Yeah. So they end up with, you go, for example, these are the things I see this a lot. These are the things we expect of a manager. And I'm like, there's 26 things on this list. So unless you're going to help them prioritize of well, these are the ones that we need you to focus on, and we're going to break that down to a couple of things. What person, and I know the working memory, it really holds 1 to 3 things well. And if you have to tumble it around, up to sort of 8 things, if you just need to remember a sequence. But when you get into 20, no human being actually even has the capacity to keep that in their working memory. So, a lot of this stuff, and then they go, it just drifts aimlessly. So what I find fascinating, Kirsty, is that you have this HR view, but then they're almost, if you were to pick polar opposite careers to do at the same time, doing due diligence for investment and private equity and stuff like that is almost the antithesis of the type of person you would envisage doing a HR thing. But I suspect that brings you a very unique skill set and view.
It does. I mean, it has enhanced my commercial capability enormously. And I don't think I really understood strategy or became a particularly strategic thinker until I stopped working in HR. I have been much more successful with HR strategy since I stopped working in HR, because
Okay.
I spent time as an HR consultant as well. So I've done all of those things, but it's one of the skills that I like to try and teach HR professionals is if you've got a good working relationship with your CEO or with your leadership team, you can help to guide them to become more strategic, because nobody else is going to ask them those questions. And so you mentioned about the why. How is probably the most common question I ask, but also what?
Yeah.
It's like you have to have your what, your how, your why, and then your who. And that's where the HR piece comes in. So one of the things that I do, like from the outset, that everybody need to stop talking about HR, stop calling it HR. And I'm not just talking about semantics. I know there's a lot of companies there with the people team.
Mhm.
Just think of us as a manager within the organization whose expertise is people. Now, every organization, whatever obstacle is in your way to achieving business goals, there is usually going to be a people element to it, a technology element to it, or a money element to it. But you can't change the technology element without people, and you usually can't change the financial element without people. So there's not a business on the planet that runs without people. And so on that basis, you need somebody whose expertise is things like, how do we make sure that we have the right people for this? But you've got to really understand what this is. You've got to know, what do we need? What are we missing? How are we going to get that? And so that involves a lot of questioning the leadership team to really try and identify what they're missing. Like, what is going to get in our way that's going to stop us getting to here? And then I just take away the people elements of it, and that's what HR can look after. But I'd like to try and flip it round. So, I'm a strategic business manager, but my expertise is in people. I'm not going to do your accounting for you because I'm absolutely hopeless with maths. All I can do in Excel is color in the squares different colors. I don't need to. I don't need to. But there are two mistakes that nearly every business I've ever worked with or for makes. They promote people into leadership roles who were good at the thing that they did before.
Yeah.
And that happens worldwide.
Yes.
There are, I would say, probably, I'm going to go with like 60-70% of managers were promoted because they're good at the functional, the individual contributor role that they had previously. There are CEOs and founders who are only CEOs because they founded the business. They had the idea. They're either a techie, if it's a tech company, they're actually a developer, but they had this great idea, and before you know it, it's like, oh gosh, it's my company, I'm now a CEO. Totally different skill set. And so that's a mistake that a lot of organizations make. And the other one is we sometimes let ego get in the way and don't want to delegate that to somebody else because it's my baby, it's my company, I founded it, kind of thing. It's like, I must be in charge. The companies that I've worked with where the founders have recognized that this is not my skill set. So I worked with a fantastic company down in the Southwest when I was working as a consultant, and founded by a married couple. They recognized that that was not them. They went out and hired an MD, and they brought her in, and she absolutely turned the business. Like, it's massive now. They're doing so well, but they recognized straight away, this is not our skill set. Like, we're really good at going out and getting business. We don't need to be running the organization. So that there's an element to that as well. So
yeah, I agree. And that is, particularly if you're talking about founder-led businesses, there's the ego, there's the fear, there's all sorts of things, that are playing into that. So here's a question. How of the HR, and this is not necessarily meant as a criticism, but more as where are the development and learning opportunities? How many of the HR folks that you speak to really understand what their business does, like how it makes,
50,
or if it's
50.
non-profit? Yeah, okay, yep.
50-50, and probably about 70-80% at you could explain it to your mum level.
Okay.
There are always questions that they don't ask. And they still, more often than not, come at their discussions with managers from an HR perspective and not from a business perspective. So this is one of my key things that we do wrong in HR. So I used to do this. I used to have my monthly cash ups with the leaders in the business, and I'd be like, hi. And we would have my little agenda, and it'd be like, what recruitment have you got going on? And does anyone need training? And have you got any employer relations issues? And their eyes would glaze over because I'm not talking their language, I'm talking my language. And quite frankly, they don't give a damn. They don't want to talk about HR. You can handle that in an email. When you flip that round to how is everything going in your team right now? Are you on course to meet your goals this month? What is keeping you awake at night? Once you start talking their language, they open up like a completely different level. It's like, she's actually asking me about me and my team and what's going on. And so you don't need to push an HR agenda because you just have a conversation about how business is going and the people issues will drop out of that. And I'm saying this to everybody. I can guarantee that you will walk away from that conversation with a to-do list, but you won't have talked about HR at all. So you also learn so much more about business when you start actually talking about the business with people rather than talking about HR. So that's one of my big kind of like, stop talking about HR. Like, that's one of my big things. And the results that I've seen people get by doing that. And I coach people through how to have these conversations because they feel a little nervous to start with because they're like, oh, shouldn't I ask something about HR? But that's the problem that we have. People don't want to know. They don't care. I don't mean that like, it sounds dreadfully cynical, but people care about what they're doing. They care about their team. And one of the biggest mistakes also that we make, we go into a new company and start on your own. We're like, hi, what would you like me to do for you? Wrong question. Yeah. We're assuming that you know what the options are, but why should you? Yeah. You've not studied HR. Like, it just like, and most of them are like, well, I don't know. What can you do? And you think, no, wrong question. Just talk about business. So we might understand what they do, but we don't talk about it enough.
You're very wise, Kirsty. So this is something I've been thinking about. I'm curious about at the moment, and my mind tends to bounce quite a bit, ideas to ideas. That's one of the reasons they have me host this podcast, because they're like, just get him doing something else so he's not annoying everybody else with all these ideas. So what may be really helpful for HR folks is to say, look at how your product and marketing teams, how they go about understanding their customers' needs. Because a lot of that is, essentially to me is a product that's offered to the business that we're going to help you stay on the right side of the law. Obviously, let's say that's a given, but B, really try and organize you so you're getting the most out of your teams and your people. Now, we can't do it for you, but we can help facilitate that process. And one of the things I've noticed quite a bit is exactly what you said. And it's totally understandable as to why, because people have come through careers in HR, but I'm coming to talk to you about things that I care about, right? But not necessarily ask you about what you care about. And if you're the customer, I need to know you better than you know yourself. And I need to know what are the things that are keeping you up at night. And how do you talk about them? How do you describe them? What language do you use?
Yes.
I suspect that a little bit of knowledge around actual like marketing and product development and that kind of stuff could actually help quite a lot, because it's like this is something I come across a bit. So engagement surveys, right? Yes, they are useful. I'm not going to argue the toss at all about them. But in terms of do we...
If they're used properly and if you actually do anything with them,
right?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so let's say as part of a feedback process that considers this, and yes, and look, I think what it can do well is take the temperature of the organization, right?
Yeah.
So and it's useful, as particularly like the larger you get, that stuff is quite useful, I think, just as a general, right? But where it's not going to help you, what are the actual initiatives that we need to prioritize that are really going to help the business move forward? And when I say prioritize, sorry, I cut the top of my nail off on when I was cutting something and it's just come off. So Apologies.
Oh.
That's why I went, I just bumped it. Typical thing. I wasn't looking. Always tell my kids, knife safety, blah, blah, blah. I wasn't looking, chopping something and just went.
You were lucky with just your nail.
Yeah, I know. I realized at that point and went and sort of went back and then went, oh, gosh, at least I didn't take the end of my finger off. So,
my dad did that last year with a hedge trimmer.
Oh!
The number of
those things are nasty.
My parents, my mum, I'm like, is Dad around? Oh, he's up a ladder with a chainsaw. I'm like, he's 79. Why is he up a ladder with a chainsaw? But no, they're avid gardeners, and yeah. Anyway, he did top of the finger with a hedge trimmer.
Yeah. So sorry, I digress. So I think that there might be that thing of saying, and this is some of the stuff I think you're talking about as well, is you've got to reframe a little bit. And so if you're just thinking about the world in terms of who are we recruiting, what performance issues are we dealing with, who's the talent, and people don't care. This is one of the things I hear a lot in the talent world. These people are ready in this whole 9-box thing. I'm like, it's too complicated. People don't think in those terms. So it might be useful as a tool to use internally in your function, but in terms of communicating, it needs to be much more customer centric. I think communication, and that would really help to convey the value. So I don't know. That's my kind of curious, pondering thought at the moment. What do you think?
I completely agree with you. I think there are areas that HR don't spend enough time learning that they absolutely should. So things like customer journey and product lifecycle. What is the customer journey in your organization? Like, how can you possibly understand your organization and what it's trying to achieve if you don't understand what your products do, who they serve, and then what that customer journey is? You have to. And so marketing and sales, those are people that you need to spend time with because they have such a phenomenal overview. They're selling the stuff, whatever it is in your organization. So for many years, I worked in commodities trading. And I can flippantly say that the overall strategy was always make more money because it was. But,
buy low, sell high.
Well, yeah. But understanding the life cycle of a trade, understanding who our customers are, understanding what are it's strange. Like, what are the factors that can make the oil market go up or down? I learned so much about weather and pirates and blocked ships in the Suez Canal and the impact that would have on the markets, because that would completely drive whether the business was having a good month or a bad month. And that's more important than, can you fill in this performance review form by the end of the month, please? Because it's, in an industry that is judged almost entirely quantitatively, the idea of having performance reviews and sitting down and having, it's like, did you make money? Yeah. Okay. Found it.
Good. Go make more.
Yeah. So no, I know I'm quite cynical, but I think for many years, the HR profession has tried to create work for itself that isn't necessarily of any value to an organization.
Ooh. Go on. I think you're on. So I think you may well be correct here, but what? Yeah, go on. I'm fascinated. Drop some science on me.
What we would overlook and never use again: policies and handbooks. Dear Lord, the last place I worked, they were actually most of the places I've worked, the employee handbook ran to over 100 pages.
Yeah.
I understand that there are laws, and I understand that you have to have certain processes for things, but a lot of organizations spend 100 pages nickel and diming every single possible scenario that might go wrong, when actually 95% of your organization are grown-ups and know how to behave at work and know how to ask a question if there's something they don't know. So we create all of this work with 5% of people that don't know what a suitable skirt length or trouser length is for work. And I dress code is a massive bugbear of mine, so if you talk to a lot of people, when you ask them, and it's one of my favorite questions to ask, what is HR? And I do it quite often on LinkedIn. I'll do, what is HR and what is HR not? And the law of the answers that you get, phenomenal. But the number of people that go policies and rules, and you just think, it's of no use to anybody. But I worked for one organization for 11 years, American organization, had a fantastic time there. I did not deal with one single grievance in 11 years. Not one. And probably only 1 or 2 disciplinaries in 11 years. So it's like, why do we have all of this documentation? It's just that's about the policies and rules thing I hate. Have performance review processes.
Yeah.
Absolute garbage.
Yeah.
In the main, because they're not used properly, they become box checking exercise. People hate doing them. Yes, people like to get feedback. Absolutely true. And also, people like to know whether they're doing a good job or not, generally. But some people are more than happy with that. If you give them a pay rise and say thanks, they're okay with that. But not everybody wants to have a great big long conversation every year. But the form thing and giving people ratings and putting them in boxes, no. For me, it used to take up so much of our time in the larger organizations I work with. And it's like, why are we the ones doing this? It's your team. It's up to you if you want to give them feedback or not, So yeah,
okay,
some of those things.
Right. So as we're sort of rounding towards the back, then I got 2 questions on this, because I think these are also bugbears of mine. All right. So and where I come at this, we must have assessed, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, right? So what we actually measure what they're doing on the job in terms of their leadership behaviors. And the funny thing that's come up is that the things you talk about are the by a country mile, the most common things that leaders don't do. Am I doing a good job? What do I need to do to do a good job? And then how do I move forward? And I'm like, these are most of them large organizations with very mature HR functions. So it's not as, so these processes are in place, and it's like, okay, well, clearly you've got these things in place. They're aligned to promotions and all the rest of it, but it's not in people's heads. They're not, that once a year thing. So I'm an advocate of, I think you could do away or at least minimize that stuff and move more towards continuous feedback and say, you just got to give them feedback, and these are the things you should discuss and whatever. So I think there's an issue right around that. I agree with you. I've got a few others that I think are a complete and utter waste of time, that I won't go into because I'll probably get myself in trouble. But I see them time and time again where they hire people who work in a job for a year and say, I'm going to build this or build that. Then they get punted. The next person comes in, says exactly the same thing. And then there's some people I've observed, the companies are 8-10 years down the line, they've still made no progress, which tells me that it's not important. If you've made no progress on it in a decade and nobody's really noticed, then it's not important. But one thing I think may be an issue, this is going to what you were saying around policies, right? And I prefer guidelines or staking out the field and saying, hey, you're adults, right? So this is what I'd like your thoughts on. I suspect, and I don't know, but this is one of the things I hear a lot. So HR organization, when I say that, let's say HR or people functions being overwhelmed, but I'm like, are you overwhelmed because you're infantile, whatever you know what I mean? Turning them, I'm not sure what the correct pronunciation is, but basically you're turning them into kids and you're creating this learned helplessness. So they're like, well, because the policy here is step 1, do this, step 2, step 3, whatever. They don't want to, they see that then as, well, I don't want to take on any risk because I might get in trouble. So every time there's an issue, right? Oh, I've got to go to HR with this. And then this almost creates like a negative feedback loop that makes HR teams busier and busier. Whereas you say, yeah, if you just have more of an adult to adult style conversation and give people guidelines and trust, in the main, they're going to work within them. Yeah. It'll make your life a lot easier. What do you think?
I think that when I worked full-time in HR, the number of conversations I would have where a manager or employee came to me with an issue and I would say, have you talked to them about it? And they'd go, no. Let's start there, shall we? So there's a dependency on HR to sort out the things that you don't want to have to deal with, to have the conversations that are a bit icky and you don't want to do it. And I think where HR, I think the word I'd use rather than infantilizing, I would use nannying.
Okay.
Because we do so much of a manager's work for them when what we should be doing is enabling them to do it themselves.
Right.
We end up, and this is not a sweeping statement. There are very under-resourced HR departments with no technology, and obviously, if you can automate your processes and things, you can make life easier. But the majority of people who say to me, "We're completely overworked. We've got so much operational stuff to do. How are we ever going to be strategic?" It's like, what are you doing for your managers that they should be doing themselves? And there's always something. And so I have a checklist as part of my program, and it's like, who does this in your organization? Who does this? Who does this? Is it manager? Is it HR? It's like, right, look at that. What if that needs to change? How are we going to change the mindsets? How are we going to educate them that it's actually your team? So I have been asked to not just type them up. We get asked to type things up a lot. Not just to type them up, but to do the performance reviews for someone's whole team because he didn't have time. And I said, are you going to give me, I said, no. But I'm like, how would you see this working? Will you give me input? No, you can just give them their reviews. I'm like, I don't work with them. How can I possibly tell them if they're doing a good job or not? Oh, I can just tell you who's good and who isn't. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. So I worked with someone last year who she's responsible for doing every single integration meeting, every single exit interview. And I'm like, and I'm just it.
Yeah.
If they want a confidential conversation, everyone talk to HR, fine. But as a general thing, let the manager do it. They're leaving your team. You ask them why. Like you're passing their probation. You were making that decision. You go easy with them. Why am I doing it? I've got a coaching client who has to do every single induction for every single new employee. Now she is the head of HR. She has a team below her, but her CEO doesn't think that's good enough. The team, but she has to do every single induction. They're quite large. It's every Monday for 3 hours. Or the most of the time. So again, some of this comes back down to the perceptions, and some of this comes back down to this just total confusion about what a manager's supposed to be doing and what HR is supposed to be doing. And so I've got very, very firm on that. Like, no, that is not what they're here to do. This is part of your job. That's an area where businesses could improve their efficiency massively if they actually had managers who knew how to manage and actually.
Yeah. Amen to that. Cool. All right. Well, Kirsty, it's been enlightening to say the least. Now, if there's HR folks out there who want to join your app, how do they do that?
Easiest way is to go on my LinkedIn. So on my LinkedIn profile page, I have on the featured section, I've got a link to the app, and I also have a link to the landing page for my strategy program. And you don't have to be an HR professional. If you want help being more strategic, whatever your role, then give me a shout. So I work with CEOs. I help HR people one-to-one build their HR strategy, working with the business strategy, and I also help leadership teams. I run strategy workshops to help leadership teams actually establish what their organization strategy is going to be and what all the different elements of it are. So, and then in terms of the app, if you're in a business that wants to get in front of an audience of HR professionals, or they are your main audience, then give me a shout about being a provider in the directory. So it's all,
cool.
it's all online. All
so
on
they
LinkedIn.
look up Kirsty Baggs-Morgan on LinkedIn with a hyphen. Yeah. Love the double barrel surname, by the way. It's very.
I'm married Welsh. Baggs is my maiden name.
So they'll look you up on LinkedIn, and all the info will be there on your profile.
Info's all there. You can drop me a DM. I love chatting to people, and I love. For me, the dissatisfaction is when someone gets feedback from their business because they've sparked a thought process in someone. They get seen differently, and I love that. So I had a lady the other day who had just done my my strategy program, and her CEO got quite cross with her line of questioning and said, "Why are you asking me the questions the FD always asks me?" And she told me this, and I was like, "Yes, he's seeing you differently. He's not seeing you now as the quality person, the Christmas party person. He's like, why are you asking me the same questions as the FD?" Like, that's the criticism we should be getting.
That's where you want to get to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well,
And
it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I'm sure we could just talk for hours on all sorts of topics.
thank you for having me.
Oh, look, absolute pleasure. And I'd love to, check in again in a little while and maybe have you back on and see how things are progressing, because you've really got your finger on the pulse on what's happening in the world of HR. So I think it's good to get it out there. If people watching and go, oh, actually, yeah, oh, geez, I can really relate to this. And then to me, that's a win, right? Because you're feeling
absolutely.
like you're not on your own.
No,
fantastic.
gosh.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Enterprise Alchemy. As always, I'm Ant, and we'll see you on the next one.